platform nations will be taking place at the University of Antwerp and will be open to all. It will, of course, be followed by the ASEN conference, Nationalism and the Media, and information on that is available online. So our event today, as usual, I have, David noted earlier, I have chaired quite a few of these, and it is true. So you probably used to seeing me by now. You know the drill. We are going to be, basically we're online on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and for members on Zoom. We are going to have a 10-minute intervention from each of our speakers, and then there will be a Q&A session where you can ask questions. You can on any of the platforms you're listening to, and then these will be passed on to me, and I will start the conversation with our speakers. So so I'm so happy, without further ado, to introduce our speakers today. We have a selection of, as I said, fantastic female scholars. We're here today to both celebrate female scholars in academia, but also to discuss the opportunities and constraints that women may face in the social sciences more broadly. So we have women at different stages of their career who will be sharing with us their experiences, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. We're going to start with, I'll introduce everyone, and then I'm just going to give the floor as we go along. So we will be starting with Professor Erin from the CEU. She's an expert in international relations. Then we have my colleague Rose de Geus. She's a lecturer in comparative politics at the University of Reading, and she's interested in gender and women in politics more generally. Then Professor Anna Triadafilidou is the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Migration, and will be giving her experiences, followed then by Liz Carter, Associate Professor, Senior Lecturer actually, in politics at Keele, interested like myself in far-right parties and party politics more generally. And then Petra Guasti, Associate Professor of Democracy at Charles University in Prague, closing us off with this very broad, interesting topic indeed of democracy. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Erin, who will be kicking off our discussion today. Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daphne, and thank you for organizing this fantastic event. I may have to leave early because I'm actually attending another workshop here in Belgrade. Just a tiny bit about me. I am probably, I'm sure, the most senior person on the panel. So this is the kind of the far end of the range of, let's say, career stages and age. I'm not sure I've broken the gender barrier myself personally, but I will take my invitation to this event as a positive sign. Just a tiny bit about me. I received my PhD back in 2000 from Stanford University, and I made a transition after a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard to Central European University, which is where I basically spent my career. I find CEU to be a wonderful institution. That said, I have encountered my fair share of issues, barriers, no doubt related in part to my gender. So the bad news is, we've been talking about this gender barrier ever since I was a grad student back in the 90s, and it's still around, right? So I think there has been some improvement. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. But first, I want to mention all the ways in which women do face barriers in the discipline, and I'm speaking broadly about political science, international relations more generally. So, for example, women are disproportionately represented in service and teaching intensive jobs. There's increased job precarity and casualization of academia, and this hurts women disproportionately. This is no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, who's listening to this. And this is compounded by the fact that this, when you're in graduate school and in your early career stages, women are very often having kids. And there is what's called a baby penalty for women that just hits women in ways that it does not hit men. And so there's a need for very many women to sort of manage this issue, right? So this is an additional burden on women. And then women's work is less likely, we know from these statistics, to be published in high-profile journals, which is associated with, you know, obviously results on the job market. The statistics also indicate that publishing with men increases the likelihood that women will be published, which is a very sad commentary, I think. Women are also less likely to be cited, again, unless they published with men, right? Women's work tends to be underrepresented in volumes, or let's say literature reviews that are edited by men. I like to use the term manographies instead of biographies, manographies, right? You're, I'm sure, familiar with looking through references and seeing just a very small handful of women as opposed to the, you know, dominant proportion, which are men. And the reality is that gender representation gets worse at every level. And here I'm drawing on a study, you may know about this, on women in UK academia and politics more generally. So this encompasses IR, political science. This was published in 2021 in Political Science Studies Review by Zoe Flager-Young, Fran Amory, Stephen Holden Bates, and the data is from 2019. And what they show is that 50% of politics students in the UK are women. 40% of postgraduates are women, but only 24% of professors are women, right? So you see the percentage just decreasing and decreasing at every stage. Also, it's, I think, telling that only 14% of all female academics are professors, but 24% of male academics are professors, right? So actual professors who are women are very relatively small proportion of all professors. And essentially what this means is that women are dropping out at each stage of the career ladder, right? So this is certainly a crisis that we've all been facing. There is a bright spot to this picture, and that is that there have been some positive developments over the years. And this is from the same article. They show that while only 24% of professors in the UK in political science were women in 2019, this number was only 11% just 10 years ago. So that's remarkable. That shows some real improvement. And from an even longer time perspective, in 1978 in the UK, only 10% of academics were women at any level. And this number has actually reached 36% by 2019. So that's a significant increase. Unfortunately, the great majority of those positions are at lower levels. So that shows that there's a significant way to go for women in the field to achieve equitable representation. And there has been some improvement in the UK in childcare policies and maternity leave over the past decade. So, and I think it also bears mentioning that these numbers are broadly comparable to the US, right? So there are a number of studies about women in the discipline in the US, and they're very, very similar. So I thought, okay, what are some tips, right, that I would like to have had when I was a graduate student? Hopefully these are, and I think they still are, relevant to people today who are, women graduate students, women in the early career stages, let's say postdoc, assistant professors. So I have a list, and I'm going to just go through them, try to be efficient here. So first of all, I think it's important to unionize. If there is a union, please join your union, right? This is necessary. Solidarity is necessary in the discipline to push for more equitable policies, particularly to mitigate the baby penalty for women. Also, there needs to be efforts to push, and I think this also needs to be done at university administration level, push for more equity on teaching, administration, student consultations. Women's work is disproportionately in those areas relative to men. And I'm sure every woman on this panel can probably speak to that. Also, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge where we are. The fact that more women are in these teaching intensive positions also means that we need to push for more equal consideration of teaching and teaching excellence in promotion decisions. As we know, publications are kind of like almost the only consideration. You know, if you're publishing very, very well, it almost overcomes any other downside, right? And I think that this is obviously something that's crucial to the profession, and it needs to be acknowledged and rewarded. On a more practical level, right? Again, you know, given that we know that men are, you know, published more, they're cited more, they're noticed more. When you're starting out, it's not a bad idea to recruit male authors. I would insist on first authorship. So this should be your project. Recruit, let's say, recruit one man. Let's say I would probably look beyond your supervisor, right? Recruiting someone who's kind of at your same career level will signal that, you know, this was a joint production rather than, you know, you were sort of kind of lifted up by a much senior person. So that's what I would say about that. Advocate for your interests at every stage. Make sure people are aware of these gender biases. So people should really know about these because it really aren't as much. Push for more gender representation in citations. Let's get rid of the monographies, similar to manels, right? The term for panels and conferences that are staffed totally by men. You know, the typical way of breaking these manels is to recruit women as, you know, chairs, you know, these sort of ceremonial positions. This is not a substitute for representing women scholars adequately in conferences and workshops. And also, and this is a little bit hard to do, I haven't really been that successful with it. I would try to ensure that you're not asked to chair quite as much. You're not asked to participate on committees where your work isn't acknowledged, right? I would, in other words, try to ensure that you're limiting your participation in service roles that are not valued by administration, universities, and department chairs, because we have a finite amount of time and we have to dedicate the bulk of our time to doing things that are actually rewarded in the discipline so that we can actually represent women better in the field. I would say copy behavior that is more common and more acceptable accepted among male academics. What are these? First of all, creating a website, right? Make sure that you have a presence online. You can do this easily through Google Sites, Bluehost, WordPress. It's almost point and click at this point. It's very easy to start your own website. You can do it in 10 minutes. Make sure that you're on social media, right? Make sure that, and I think the members of this panel are quite good at all of these things. So you should look at what they do. And that's another tip that I would give, is to look around you and see what others doing who are kind of, you know, cited. Twitter threads, through Facebook groups that are dedicated to the area of expertise that you work on. Write blog posts. When you publish something, email that article to each person that you reference. Write blog posts about each of those articles. Get used to self-promotion. I know people, and they're typically men, who everything that they put out, they actually send like just a mass email to every single person in their address book. It's one way to get all of your work kind of noticed to, you know, all the people out there. And then, yeah, this is something that you'll probably do as you advance in your career and you get, you know, published more. When certain topics come up, unearth old articles and old work that you've done, and, you know, remind people, you know, continually remind people of work that, Remember that you were swimming upstream. Remember these statistics. And so I think that would allow you to savor your victories more, right? You have earned them. Be sure to carve out personal time. Be sure to cultivate a network of allies, especially among senior academics and peers in your field. Reach out to people you admire in the field, read their stuff, talk to them about it. Academics are very self-involved people, and they love fans. So this is almost always going to be a positive experience for you. And that will allow you to share your work and your interests with them. I would also consider reaching out to the policy world and the industry, because this would give you more options in case the academic job market does not pan out. You can either move laterally, in some cases you can move back into the profession, but make sure that you're expanding the options that you have rather than contracting them, especially as you're in the job market. I would also really ensure that you cultivate a kind of, this is going to sound very neoliberal, but a brand for yourself, right? An expertise, something that you can easily kind of market yourself as on your blog or on your website or to other people. Ensure that people know that you have skills, right, that are valued. And this will also make you an attractive co-author and fellow researcher, and someone who can join grant making teams. Speaking of which, do apply to the grants. That's got to be a kind of a constant thing. Try to have something in the pipeline, the publication pipeline, all the time. You got to start doing that already in the graduate school. Maybe run for chairs of sections in conferences, because that will help you get your word out. Approach editors early, make yourself known, and reach out to scholars you admire again. I think informational interviews are useful, asking people about how they got into their profession and getting sort of advice from them. And then finally, as Professor Terry Carl told me once, what's so important is to support other women, because together we are strong, and together we can correct systemic injustice in the gender allocation of work and reward in the discipline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin, so much. Wealth of fantastic tips there for everyone. I hope everyone is listening and making notes. These are wonderful, wonderful. Hopefully we can ask Erin more during the Q&A if you stay. I know some members of the panel need to leave earlier, so I'm going to pass quickly now on to Rose.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was making lots of notes there during Erin's talk. So I'm kind of on the other side, I guess, of the career spectrum, in that, so I obtained my PhD in 2017, which to me feels a long time ago, but I think that still makes me an early career researcher. And so since then, I've done a postdoc at the University of Toronto. That was 2 9-month contracts. And then I did a postdoc at Nuffield College in Oxford, which unusually was a 3-year contract. And then in September 2021, I joined the University of Reading as a lecturer. And to non-UK people, that's basically like an assistant professorship. I also have a wonderful 20-month-old daughter. So I have recently also started to experience what it's like to be an early career researcher and an academic, as well as a parent. So that's just a little bit of kind of where I'm coming from and what my experiences have been shaped with. So in thinking about this, I thought, well, actually, I study bias toward women politicians all the time. And so let's think a little bit about what that research tells us, and if we can kind of see those same patterns in kind of our own work as well. And spoiler, we do. So I think one thing that we find when we look at women in politics is that direct bias does exist. Some voters really don't want to elect women to political positions because they think they're not suitable because of them being a woman. But the direct bias is not the most prominent type of bias. And so really a lot of what's going on is kind of like hidden types of bias, as well as like structural inequalities. And so what I mean by that is that we see in the world of politics that there's a lot of differences in resources between men and women in terms of who can run for office. And these differences are even greater for women of color. We also see that a lot of bias kind of expresses itself through the fact that women politicians and women candidates need to perform to a higher standard to be elected. We also see that once women are in politics, that they kind of have to play by different rules. So they have to adhere to stereotypes. They can't be just too masculine because they're seen as too ambitious or too cold or too standoffish or things like that. So they have to somehow show both leadership as well as empathy and caring, and not presenting as stereotypically feminine is a problem for women in politics. We also see that leadership positions are especially difficult to obtain. So even though there's more representation of women in lower levels of office or in parliament, still vast underrepresentation in things like cabinet and prime ministerships and things like that. And on the positive side, we see that role models really matter. So seeing more women in office encourages women to also run for office and can have kind of these inspiring effects. And so I think that there's a lot of kind of commonalities really between what we see happening in that world and what we see kind of in academia as well. And now I'll kind of relate this a bit just to my own experiences. And I think, at least for me, direct bias has been quite rare, although it does happen. In a previous position, I have been told by someone that I was hired only because I was a woman. Kind of denying the qualifications I had for that position. I've also directly experienced being paid less for the exact same job that a male colleague was, which I only found out afterwards, and which I only, the main reason for that was simply that he asked for more money and I did not. And so even if you study gender bias for a living, you still are able to fall into this trap. I think structural inequalities matter a lot. And I think it might be a problem in that for people who don't experience it, the absence of direct bias might suggest that there isn't a lot of bias, because it's not as if people are necessarily negative about women or disparaging about women kind of to your face, but there's a lot of kind of these hidden forms of bias, I think. In terms of, I think, my experience of being a postdoc and being on several short-term contracts, this was definitely the time that I considered leaving academia most strongly. And a big reason for that was that my partner and I wanted to at some point have a family, and it was hard to see how to do that when I was on these kind of short-term contracts. And especially, I remember looking at postdocs and trying to find out what even the maternity policy would be, finding out in many cases you don't qualify, or you have to work somewhere for 6 months before you would qualify, which obviously becomes virtually impossible given that a pregnancy is 9 months. And I think this is especially harmful given also the kind of prime we put on mobility in academic careers. So it's, you know, kind of regarded a good thing if you're able to work at different institutions, especially early stages, if you can work at different places and if you can move around a bit. All of these things combined, I think, do make it harder for women to take these positions. I'm also thinking about, you know, prestigious postdocs that are really short term are, I think, kind of excluding people who have caring responsibilities. And I'm not just thinking about children, but this could be a whole different range of caring responsibilities, people who need to rely on social networks, things like that. I think that's something that's really, really harmful. Then something else that that is true in politics as in, I think, social sciences is the idea that they're just different standards, and Erin mentioned this as well about co-authoring and the value that's put on that. I think for women academics, it's especially important to be able to show what your independent contribution is, because otherwise it might not be valued to the same extent. I mean, I've definitely like received comments about or questions about, you know, what my particular contribution was to a paper, even when I was the first author in that. So I think another thing that I've been thinking about quite a bit is the idea if when you've managed to stay in academia and obtain a position, then how do you progress? Because as Erin also mentioned, yeah, the higher up you come in academia, the fewer women there are. And I think grant funding is really important to that. And that's something that as an early career researcher, I'm very aware of kind of the need for that, and also the kind of ability that gives to, you know, to create a research identity and to create your own independent projects and things like that. But then, yeah, if you look at, I looked at some data from UKRI, which is British, and the EU, and there we see that the success rate of men and women is similar, but the number of female applicants is much lower, and the average value of the award is lower for women. And so this headline thing where you think, oh, that's encouraging, then it actually becomes very discouraging when you dive into it a bit deeper. And I think there's a lot that could be done there in terms of thinking about who is on the review panels, but also reading through some of these funding bids. I think the language in those can be off-putting to certain people, with the great emphasis on, I guess this goes to the point about promoting yourself and you know, putting yourself out there and portraying yourself as a very successful you know, academic scholar with all these great and brilliant ideas that are going to totally change the future and change the knowledge as we know it, which is something that might have quite a gendered dimension to it. And I think it's important to be aware of that. In terms of, I figured I should try and end on something positive. So role models do matter, and I think that's very true. And I've always been very fortunate to have really strong female role models kind of around me throughout my academic career. And that's been really important. As well as I think that peer support is really important. I have a really good set of people that I've met throughout postdocs and PhD, and I think maybe particularly women are very good at, I think, supporting each other and encouraging each other in a way that can be really, really helpful and inspiring, and also kind of moves away from a kind of competitive attitude to academia to one that's really much more about kind of supporting and celebrating each other. But then I worry a little bit about this sometimes, in that I think if we put all the obligation and burden on women, and then especially senior women, knowing how few of them are there for all this mentoring, that we risk kind of adding to their burden. And so I think I have also been fortunate to work with great male supervisors, and I think we can ask more of them in terms of, you know, providing space, providing co-authoring opportunities, providing funding opportunities, and being much more active, I think, in kind of addressing these issues. So that was it. Thank you.
Wow, Rose, thank you so much. I have related to every single word that you have said. And when you're talking about the hidden biases, all I can think of is basically just link, you know, my own experiences, and I'm sure everyone else listening to us. So thank you so much for that. Maybe we can just quickly add that, in fact, just doing this event and having everyone here share these experiences is another thing that we can do to help these biases. So yeah, thank you so much. And now we can hear from Anna.
Yeah, thank you both, Erin and Rose. Yeah, Erin, you bet you're not the more whatever senior in whatever way. I think we're same generation. So yeah, very happy to be here and share this important opportunity. Actually, I want first to start with the land acknowledgement that I connect to the seminar from the Toronto, which is the Dish with One Spoon territory, and it's the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississauga Indigenous peoples. And I want to say something, because the dish with one spoon means the dish is our natural landscape, is nature and the resources it gives us, and one spoon is that we all have one spoon to take from this dish. But this means we all have an obligation to care for it, and we are only caretakers. And I want to acknowledge I've been here now 3 years almost, And it's been a mind-expanding experience, and I'm still struggling to understand in what way I'm a settler, because in Canada we use the word guest and the word settler, and for me, I'm a white settler and I'm an uninvited one. And it's not easy for me, even it hasn't been easy as a migration scholar to come to terms and understand this, because I've been used to look into migration and refugees you know, as you can imagine, a different perspective that did not integrate the indigenous point of view. And on this occasion, in relation to Daphne's acknowledgement of the Ukraine invasion of the Ukraine by Russia, I want to say also that the right to asylum has no color and knows no ethnicity. The bombs do not discriminate, and this is, I think, something we shouldn't forget, both in this crisis and in past crises. But without further ado, to get back to our thing about women, I want to start a bit, how can I say, iconoclastically, by something that an older colleague had told me a few years back. We were both giving a seminar with a group of young people, and she's from Denmark, and she said, my advice might sound like, how can I say, ideologically, how can I say, politically not correct, but the best choice you can make, you cannot choose the country you're born in, you cannot choose the family if you want, the class, how affluent or how educated your family is, but you can choose your partner. And that will make a big difference in your career. And I know this is not a very institutional or policy relevant you know, advice, but suddenly, although I had never thought of my husband in this way, I thought, oh my God, she just nailed it. And it is something like you can choose your partner, and that makes a whole lot of difference. Because I do think, and I think Rose in particular reflected on it, that there comes, I mean, it is a difficult time after PhD and before you start kind of like in that intermediate space that is increasingly longer in my experience, also in my generation's experience in Europe, because I've lived and worked mostly in different European countries between, say, the mid-90s and 3 years ago. There is this intermediate space, and I'm totally, and I know, I think Daphne said, and I'm sure Erin and the others relate to this different difficult period, and this is the time also that you might be finding a long-term partner and starting a family. And however, I want to also say that I feel we're in this together with our husbands, with our partners. And I see this in all young academics. And I remember also talking with friends, both girlfriends and, you know, and men friends, that it is a difficult period. And on this, my advice is don't give up, because this period will pass, and we've all been through it. And it's probably, unfortunately, true in most of the careers. And so I think it is important not to give up and to persevere, because it is important to have a career and a family. Because I think what I'm seeing more often among women than among men, that when it comes to children, you find it's not compatible. And unfortunately, I think we still get this advice. Yes, actually, if you want to be a good mother, you cannot be a career professional or a career academic. So, you know, get a teaching job, do your teaching, and then by 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, you're at home so you can look after your child. Because if you don't do that, your child won't develop well cognitively, emotionally, and physically. And I have 4 children myself, and I don't think, I mean, I would have hoped we did a good job, but it is true that I even remember my older son was 2.5 months old, and I had gotten this invitation to teach as a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges, and I just couldn't say no. And this is also something I want to say. These opportunities, particularly when you are at that early career stage, they will only come once, and you have to jump on the train. Yeah, you cannot miss it. That the next train is not going to come. So I still remember that morning, and we lived in Florence and in Italy, and I'm like handing Dionisio to my husband and say, you know, like, for 2 days you have to look after him. And you know, yeah, they had a bit of a wild ride, because Dionisio basically slept through the day and stayed up through the night. So that is one thing, but so that is important. Don't give up, and yeah, your partner will be very important in supporting you, and that is also for instance, it hasn't happened personally to me, but it has happened to many friends. Sometimes you have to care for elderly parents or for someone who is ill in the family. And it is very important that you share this burden with your partner. It doesn't become, as it used to be, a woman's burden. On the other hand, as a person also working with colleagues, both peer-to-peer, but also as a more, in a more supervisory or coordinating role, I have caught myself having this bias. Oh, this woman colleague has had recently a child. We shouldn't ask her to lead this, go there, do that. And I caught myself thinking of that, probably thinking I'm going to make her life easier, but that's not fair. And I've been since thinking that I will tell her, I will not stop assigning the work to her or asking her, like as a peer, take this work, and but also make it clear that if she refuses, it's not a problem. We'll find someone else who doesn't have at this moment this particular challenge of care, because I think that can also be counterproductive. And then again, I will remember again another Scandinavian colleague with whom we were talking about these issues. And in Scandinavia, they have very generous, maternity and also paternity programs. But he was saying, and that was maybe 15, 16 years ago, he was telling me he had with his former wife 3 children. And he said, if they had already been separated. But he said, if my wife had taken all the permissions she had, like all the maternity leaves, she wouldn't have a career, because let's face it, with 3 children, she would be off work for 5 years. And if at that stage she was off, or at any stage you're off for 5 years, then you're still in the profession, but maybe your career or your aspirations are significantly curtailed. So that is also a dilemma that I haven't myself solved. I hardly took any maternity during when I had my children newborn, both because I was working with projects, and projects cannot wait for 9 months. There's things happening. In my 4th child, I had the luxury to have also a teaching job that I could not teach, but I was doing everything on research. And I don't know what is my advice on this. To be honest with you, I really don't know, because I still feel, and the other day I was advising a young father in my team whose newborn is now 2 months old, and he's got an important contract for a book to write. And I said, I'm sorry, you'll have to write the book. You'll have to write it together with holding your daughter in the evening, because again, that train won't come, and you need that train now to get to your next job. Third thing I want to say is intersectionality. And I study migration, and I've often think when also sometimes as a working mother, you also get a lot of praise. Everyone in your extended family and friends, they say, oh my God, how do you do this? And I have to say that my husband often said, hello guys, I'm here too. I've been, holding babies during the night. What about this, stupid father there? But I think so. I feel there's something you do get that recognition. But I've always been thinking, if it wasn't for migrant women babysitters, we wouldn't have gotten through those years. And that is perhaps a little different here in Canada. I think in Europe it's a common knowledge, and I've worked a lot on migrant women who are domestic workers and caregivers as a research topic. And I've always been thinking, how do they do it? Because I know how I do it, but I come to it certainly in a certain luxury position, but how do they do it? And today, I think to this day, probably all the biases become much, if we started, and I don't know the statistics, but if we did and certainly there is something about the generational change, as you said, Erin, we are progressing. So, and I think that there is something about, women progressing along the hierarchy, but I wonder if we start thinking also of issues of non-white women, where do we get, or I think in academia as migrant women, and I think many of us in this panel are migrant women, we are seen as I don't know if you're familiar, with this terminology in migration. So like there's the migrants and the expats are the luxury migrants. So we're more of expats rather than, but the other migrant women or even minority women and the double, disadvantage that they're facing, and often, I mean, the unequal gender relations that they're facing also within their families, and compounded problems. So I think certainly this is an area that I would really like to see more progress. And in this, I think, however, alliances, and I believe Rose also mentioned it, I think we need to make alliances with men. And it so happens my 4 children are all boys. So I'm thinking you can only first of all, lead by example, at whatever stage and age you are, in what, how the relations should be and what a woman can do. But also we need to build those alliances. I was saying the other day, I was talking with this young man, and he's such a participating father that I feel that that's what we need to do, to say, both to our institutions and to the people, we need to do this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So much there. 3 words I kept that, again, I could really relate to: support, perseverance, and alliances. And I think that's really key. And key to remember that sometimes you have this, behind this facade of this, I think Erin also mentioned it in Rose, this really successful woman who really, posts her work and gets so much traction. There are a lot of dilemmas there behind that need to be answered, and a lot of choices that need to be made. So yeah, difficult decisions, but support, alliance, and perseverance could be the way forward. Thank you. And now I think now we're going to hear from Liz.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I guess in terms of situating ourselves, I'd situate myself in the middle of the 2 extremes, if you'd like. And so when I started thinking about these questions, I decided to think all the way back to when I was doing my PhD, and to then pause and think to the next crunch period. We don't have tenure in the UK in the same way as in North America, but that crunch period of moving from lecturer to senior lecturer or tenure. And then I also thought that I'd reflect a little bit from the other end of the spectrum, if you like, for the other end of the microscope, in terms of over the last 7-8 years, I've been in a number of administrative leadership positions or whatever, including being dean for research. So I found myself in a situation where I had to think differently about these issues and how to support colleagues. And incidentally, as we've all talked about, not just female colleagues, male colleagues as well. So, I mean, I guess 2 other caveats. My experience is quite a UK-based experience. And the other caveat is I don't have 4 boys. I don't have any kids. So I haven't met these challenges in the same way, but I'm very sort of mindful of how that's shaped my experiences, but at the same time also mindful to try and keep a very open mind and an understanding mind, for people who have. So they're my caveats really. But I mean, in terms of my experiences, I won't say everything that I was going to say, because most people have already covered them. But if I think back to the very start, I have to admit that, well, maybe I was just naive, but this wasn't on my radar at all. I mean, I wasn't so stupid as to not know that there were the big gaps that we've talked about in terms of senior women in the profession. I also firmly knew about pay differentials. But on a day-to-day basis, my experiences were good as a PhD student, supervised by a male supervisor who was extraordinarily supportive. I didn't see that my experiences were any way different from my male colleagues, from male students. And equally, when I also did a postdoc, and I only felt well supported and well treated. I was very, very lucky. And when I first got my lectureship, ditto. So I can't point to any particular moments where I faced discrimination or anything like that. And so I don't have any horror stories to tell, I guess. But what did become clear to me in the next few years, and perhaps there's a slight delay in terms of how speedily people get through their PhDs in the UK versus North America or other parts of Europe, because my friends weren't having kids in grad school, put it that way. They were having kids when we were lecturers. But clearly that's when the crunch came. And moving on to those next years of the really big, what I think one of the really big transitions of tenure, if you like, or moving from lecturer to senior lecturer, it was very clear that I could see colleagues who had families were taking much longer to do that, you know, for the reasons everybody's talked about. And again, I dug a little bit in the data, and it seems that, you know, the data supports what we've all been saying. It seems that despite what you were saying, Rose, about short-term postdocs, which is a very, you know, big challenge, the pay differentials at entry level are not marked at all. And I think another difference, certainly now compared to when I started, was despite still some differences, there were many more women coming into well, I guess into my field than there were when I started. I mean, I remember starting and 80%, 90% of everything I read was written by male. You know, well, the extreme right is not a very female-friendly area anyway, but and that's changed. So that you know, that I guess is good news. But yeah, so there were, I think there are crucial barriers at that crunch stage, and we can see that you've all pointed to data about that crunch stage. I looked at data on tenure and how different you know, how men and women go through tenure and so on, and it supports everything we've said. And then obviously the data that goes on to support not only the number of women in senior positions, but the pay differentials there as well. So yeah, I guess just to defend my naive self of 20 plus years ago, it wasn't that I just didn't know, it's just it wasn't on my radar, and I think that's possibly still the case now. And in some ways I think it's important that people know about this, but also I would be worried about not putting too much burden on people who are just starting, not going down the line of going, oh, it's only going to get worse, you know, this is doomed. So I think it's just something to bear in mind, and to fight all these battles, as all of you have said, as we go on through all these things, as you said, Erin, through unionisation, and then, but also through the sort of softer, more yeah, the peer supports, the network building, and all that kind of thing. And I guess just as a footnote, before I move on to maybe saying something more positive about improvements, is none of us have yet mentioned COVID, which I think is possibly something that might have dented any progress. But in terms of progress, I wanted to say just a couple of positive things, and they pick up on a few things that have been said. I think that institutions can do things at the local level. I think institutions are all very different, and perhaps, well, I come from a very small institution which has many challenges, but one good thing about being small is you can do stuff. And I think we have managed to do things in terms of supporting people. And again, it is around having kids, but it's also around all sorts of caring responsibilities, and also bereavement. So reducing teaching loads, reducing marking loads, changing timetabling, just practical everyday things that I think we have done, and we've done it quite well. And then wider cultural things. So 10 years ago, we didn't even think about this, but now we don't have meetings before 10:30, and we don't have meetings after 3:30, and we try and minimize lunchtime meetings, and we don't have meetings in half term. And that just, unless it's absolutely life or death, you know, we do things like that. And then we've also managed to, well, there has been a concerted effort to try and encourage women to go for promotion. There's a long way to go, but I think, you know, we can do things around that. So yesterday, for example, the yearly readerships got announced. And it was split down the middle. It was 50-50, and I can say that 10 years ago that would not have been the case. So that's been good. Interestingly, and it's perhaps something we can come back to in the questions, it has not been met with approval from across the board. when the promotions to chairs get announced, and over the last 3 or 4 years there've been at least as many women as men, there have been those mutterings about, yeah, well, we know why that's the case. So yeah, that's something to sort of to think about. And again, although we've got a long way to go on this, that there are specific women mentorship schemes, but we've heard about this, and I definitely agree that sometimes puts more burden on women colleagues than is needed. And then just one other improvement on a national level, and this is actually quite, I feel a bit bad saying this because it is so UK centric, but in our whole life that is guided in the UK by the Research Excellence Framework, by which we live or die. So the research, every X years our research gets nationally assessed, and that's how a big tranche of the funding is decided. Things have changed, and without going into boring details, I think they have actually changed for the better in terms of supporting people who have faced challenges in their life, whether it's having a family or whether it's having ill parents or support other caring responsibilities. So I think there's more wiggle room there, which I'm not suggesting they made it like this to support people, but I just think it's possibly, a positive spin-off of the changes. I guess the last point I want to make is about what challenges remain and what can be done. And I just want to focus on one thing, and it is a bugbear of mine, so forgive me if I'm just going down the rabbit hole, but it definitely picks up on what Erin, you said, and what's been mentioned. And it's the endless pursuit of metrics in our sector. Standards, metrics, anything, if it moves, it can be measured. And obviously that's led to the introduction of more and more targets, and that has had a detrimental impact on equality and on gender equality for sure, but all types of equality for that matter. So as we've talked about, there's metrics on funding, on grant income. There's metrics on how many things you need to publish. There's metrics on where you need to publish, and league tables, and then there's whether they're 4-star, 3-star, whatever. And then there's metrics in teaching, and as I say, if anything else stands still long enough, there'll be a metric on that. And the problem with that is that obviously these get written into promotion criteria, but the second step is they also, certainly at our place, they get written into role expectations. More or less they get written into your contract. And the pernicious thing is that they're phrased in gender neutral terms. And so the idea is that they avoid distinguishing by gender or for any other, protected characteristics. But we could equally argue, and I think it would be right to argue, that they're gender blind. They're not gender neutral, they're gender blind. And gender is a significant factor in our ability to achieve those targets. And it goes back to what Erin was saying about teaching roles and I can't remember what you call them, service roles, I think you called them. And the point here is not that the point here is that certain people do more of those. I wouldn't say women do more of those, full stop. It's certain people do more of those, and there tends to be more women who are that certain people. I think I'd put it like that. We talk about women in caring roles, in pastoral support roles, and so on. And I really don't want to give out the impression that there are no men who do these roles, and the men don't care about their students, and men don't, all that. That's absolutely not the case. But I think the problem is that if we look at the distribution and we split things into people who really pursue individual career achievement type roles, or if we're unkind, call them instrumental behaviour. And then we split it into people who pursue collective, team-orientated or collective good roles. There is a gender divide. And just to repeat, there were plenty of men in the second category and there were plenty of women in the first category. But the point is that there were more women in the second category than the first category. And when I was doing for research, I started off thinking about these two groups, although it's quite a naive way of just putting people into two groups. I appreciate that. But to cut a long story short, we can come back to this, but I moved from having reservations about instrumental selfish people to recognizing that we need instrumental selfish people, but we also need collective good people, and we need to make the argument that we need both people. So to put it in another way, the colleague who managed to get out of absolutely everything in all citizenship roles and all service roles and just wrote books and like trumpeted, you know, blew their own trumpet, used to annoy me a lot. And I have to admit that it probably annoyed me even more that this colleague was female. And yet, when it came to the crunch, I thought, damn it, we need people who are going to produce really good books and who are going to manage to do impact case studies. But we also need to recognize, and then we need to really make clear that we also need the people who will run the program, who will provide the pastoral support, who will do the citizenship activities, who will do the service activities. And so from the other side of the table, in terms of when I had my, you know, my sort of dean hat on, I wanted to try and change the narrative and just shift that narrative to understanding that we need both types of people. And I think that first step of understanding it and then making it clear and you know, saying it loudly is the first step to trying to change the well, to try and institutionalize it and trying to change the incentive structures. Now, you might decide that this is utterly naive and that, you know, the sector-wide, national-wide, and indeed international-wide constraints are such that I'm wasting my time. But, and this is the point I'll finish on, I think we need both types of people because both types of people exist. And if we don't recognize that, we're privileging some people over others. But also it will make, or even tiny weeny steps make for a nicer place to work. They make for more sort of humane place to work and with more equitable structures and with more respect amongst colleagues, I think, and more support and better sort of convivial interpersonal skills. So as I say, I might be barking up the wrong tree entirely, and this might be completely naive, but I think even in very small ways, if we can do such things, it could help, you know, at least tackle some of the issues of inequality and gender inequality for sure, but wider inequality, I guess. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. So many truths that you just said there, I think, and coming from also from a UK institution, again, I really put myself in all these situations that you described. And, you know, you said the word naive many times, and I was also remembering my naive younger self, and I wonder if that's actually what kept me going. Perhaps without that naivety, perhaps I wouldn't be here. But thank you so much, Liz. And now, last but not least, we are going to hear from Petra. Petra, my BBC news alert tells me you'll be speaking to us at the same time as the Ukrainian president will be addressing the House of Commons. So that's an interesting point. Off to you.
Thank you. And so I completely understand if you choose Volodymyr Zelensky over me, but you can also watch either of us later on. So if you're sticking here, thank you very much for taking the time, and thank you, Daphne, for the invitation. I want to, before I get to the question we are addressing here today, I would like to express my support for Ukrainian women and ask each and every one of us on this call and watching this later on to think and to work on how our institutions and how we as individual scholars can help displaced Ukrainian scholars and students. And there are many ways, there are many new initiatives starting, and I'm very grateful for that, and it's very important. So in my contribution, I want to reflect on my experiences in Germany and in Czech Republic and how they communicate with each other, and perhaps more broadly, what can still be done and what I found extremely beneficial for myself. So in lieu of just a few words about myself, I have spent about 15 years in German academia, as a scholar from Eastern Europe. I cannot count the times. I mean, look, German academic does not look like me. He doesn't speak like me. It is not like me. People like me are in caring roles. There are migrants, as it would be said in all German crime TV series. They are sex workers and they end up dead in the first 5 minutes of the series. And so I think it's really important. And as I study representation and democracy, descriptive representation really matters. So I spent, I have spent 15 very enjoyable years facing direct and indirect bias. But I think it's important to, at a certain point, both be able to acknowledge it and don't let it hold you back. I think in a face of bias, just, sometimes being culturally different, you can just simply pretend you don't understand, even if you understand very well. You can cry later on in the bathroom, but just don't show them weakness, like don't show it's getting you. And if you need, like, definitely know your rights as a migrant within the EU, and don't be afraid to consult if you need to. I want to mention something I've benefited very much from, and which I see as a really way to counter the bias, and these are mentoring programs. So I see them as the best tools for supporting women in academia. I think mentoring programs are best when they are targeting cohorts, in particular a certain career stage, where the groups work best together. So I think doctoral, postdoctoral, even newly appointed professors can greatly benefit from this. The universities I've worked at were really leaders in this. Goethe University has actually a statewide mentoring program for both academics and for students from MA to young professors, to newly appointed professors. And so what happens in these mentoring programs is that women are fostered in women's careers are fostered in 3 different and intertwined ways. These provide targeted workshops by professionals on everything from presentation through soft skills to contract negotiation, to not be afraid to ask. And when you practice it, I really believe in practicing, like every important talk, even with students and even for myself until today. So once you already had to say it loud, it becomes much easier. They also provide individual mentoring based on a deep relationship, which takes usually 1 year with a mentor, but it doesn't end there from my experience. So the mentor-mentee relationship, it's an additional person to your PhD supervisor, somebody who is wholeheartedly in your corner and is there to support you through a very difficult transition, for example, from PhD to the postdoc, which many of the previous speakers talked about. And the third is the peer learning. So through the exchange of experiences, we all go through different experiences. I have all a list of things I have learned already tonight from the previous speakers, and all I haven't implemented. So I think these are really important matters. And if we are in position of power, we should demand institutionalization of these mentoring programs at our institutions. I have personally participated in the Christine Despizan mentoring program for postdoctoral researchers in social sciences at the University of Mainz. I cannot underestimate how much the program helped me in my career. The workshops were absolutely amazing. I still have handouts which I consult until today, especially on interviews, how to present yourself in interviews. The exchange with peers was great because we faced similar issues, and knowing that you are not alone that it's not like, I think that in isolation, you know, we think that this is just happening to us and we blame ourselves. And I think that knowing that there are other things or other people, other women facing the same, facing same or similar issues, that was really important. And it helps you to develop coping strategies. And so the more you know, the more resilient you become. However, I think that the most invaluable for me was the relationship with my mentor, which was invaluable, and I'm so grateful. So I'm so grateful to her, but also to all the organizers. And I mean, you know, the bottom line on this is this: you have to be able and force yourself to say it loud that you want to be a professor. You have to be able to say it, and it you know, it's terrifying. I mean, it has been terrifying for me, because it means that you have to deep inside yourself accept that you have all it takes. And to everybody who is watching, I want to say, you have, every single woman, you have what it takes, and no man has ever asked himself the question. And so just go for it and ask for help. So coming back to my native Czech Republic in 2021, I found a discipline still trying to reconstitute itself after 3 decades of catching up to the West. It's like a dog who's running after a bus, but the bus is moving. And so it is where it is. In total, there are 3 full female professors in this country today in political science, and 3 associate professors. So this is where we are, and it's not good. So the Czech pipeline is absolutely leaking. I mean, like big time. We have my class, my intro into Pol Sci is full of women. It's, I would say, 60% women. MA programs, still about half, significantly fewer PhD students. What I have noticed is that women seem to be trapped in the assistant professor phase when they need to pursue habilitation, which is still just like Venia Legendi. It's still done in Germany, still done in many parts of Eastern Europe. And that coincides with the family having phase. So some remain stuck in the lecture, some women remain stuck in the lectureship positions or in adjunct positions, even worse. Others accept administrative positions, so in order to be better able to have a work-life balance, but there is no moving back from administrative position. Once you are trapped there, you are trapped there. And some, yet others leave academia completely. And so I see fixing the leaking pipeline by finding better ways for creating opportunities for young scholars as a paramount. I hope that with our first female rector, it took us 637 years to get there, but we have now the first female rector of Charles University. I would hope that we could become a flagship for other universities in the region to show them that this can be done, and that what it takes is an institute, it takes leadership, but it also takes institutional commitment and resources. These mentoring programs must be done professionally, and I hope I could be able to contribute to these efforts in any way I can. Looking back, the people who are most important, who continue to be most important in my academic career are women, as role models, as supervisors, as habilitation supervisors, as mentors, even as people I read, the subdisciplines I choose. Unlike Daphne and Liz, I read a lot of women, I teach a lot of women. I'm very aware I want women in my syllabi. I don't want that it ever happens again, that a German student came to me because he realized Nancy Bermeo was a female. And he kept saying he when he presented his little paper. And I didn't want to make him feel bad, but then I started to speak about it as she, and he came to me horrified after and saying, it blew my mind. I didn't know women could have these big ideas. And I was like, so something has changed that day. I believe and that I will close with this. I believe that if we get to have a place at the table, we ought to bring a second chair and ask fellow female academics to join it. And if we do that in a little way, the table is going to be more full of people who look like us and who view academia more like us. And we are going to be able to counter the bias facing women in academia. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra, so much. These numbers that you just talked about, wow. Yeah, wow. And I mean, this does make me think as well, because my comparative brain thinks comparatively, but it does make me think as well, both about obviously the UK where I work, but also my own experiences from Greece and some interesting parallels there. So wow, there is a lot still to be done. I was also impressed by what you said, don't show weakness. I think that's always been my weakness, that I always show weakness. But I guess we have to be ultimately who we are. So I think we have had some fantastic interventions here. I've learned so much, and I'm also really glad that ASEN has been able to give us all a platform to actually express these experiences and to discuss and to give some tips to others who might be listening. We already have a few questions, so I'm just going to start with these questions and then just let the panel respond. We've lost 2 people, but we knew that's because they had unfortunately other commitments and had to leave early. So the first question is about specifically about kinds of discrimination that we get in academia that may not exist in the wider world. And when I got this question, it made me also think of, I've often been told things such as, what's a sweet girl like you studying the far right? But we know women don't understand numbers. I've been told these things in my face, right? What, you do quantitative science, but women don't do numbers. So do you think that there are particular kinds of discrimination that as women we face in the social sciences that may not exist in other settings? I'm going to go with Petra first, because she was the last one to give her intervention.
Yes, and I say to that, water off duck's back. It says everything about the people saying it and nothing about you. You are great at numbers. I force every student in my class to read your work. And I think that is important. Like if they are going to read, I think it tells a lot on how they were raised. They didn't read enough women on their syllabi. They didn't have enough women in positions of power in their department. And so I want my syllabi to look a certain way. And yeah, they're like dinosaurs, so what?
Anna.
I think that, okay, my feeling is we're privileged compared to other sectors. What the stories I've heard from friends and family in other sectors I just couldn't believe my ears. And I'll tell you the stories they heard from me. They couldn't believe we have such male colleagues who acknowledge privilege and want to ally. Having said this, and of course I think, and actually that is something I wanted to say before, and I didn't say it because it was going on too long, about our national academic cultures. Is this microaggressions that you used to hear more? I think much less now. Now, Daphne, you will understand me in terms of the Greek language when people would tell you kouklamu, which is like my darling, my beautiful girl, but it is a way of building intimacy and condescending at the same time. It's like, and I think, I'm sure, Petra, when you spoke both about Germany and the Czech Republic, I think I can relate totally. So this kind of building a friendly relation, but it's really condescending and somehow signaling you're younger, you're a woman. And they wouldn't say the equivalent to a young man colleague. So I think that we might have, but I'm not sure it is worse than in other sectors, I'll be honest.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there is I think there are, well, first of all, I definitely agree with the privileged perspective point. I think there are quite big differences in national cultures. You mentioned France and Italy. I think, the stereotype in Italy is you need to carry the professor's bag for 20 years and then, then you might be allowed to think or do something. And obviously, I hope we've moved on from there, but I don't, there's plenty wrong with the UK, but that's I think we're in a good position in that respect. But having said that, I think the differences in the national cultures within the academic sector also reflected in differences amongst public attitudes towards academics, cross-nationally. So, I think, or to put it simply, I think if you said to people that you're a female academic in the UK, most people are like, oh, right, yeah, that's fine. But if you said that in other countries, it would be less fine. I don't know. I think there are national differences. I think on the other hand, I mean, I appreciate that gender is very much our focus, but I think there are other discriminations that we face in academia. And again, it's sorry to be context specific, but I think there's a massive classist issue in the UK in academia. And I don't know how much that travels, but having colleagues who come from, fairly socially deprived backgrounds and so on, I've seen people face discrimination for their backgrounds, and equally, the whole elitist, which universities you got your PhD at or you studied at, and I think that's an issue. So it goes back to the point on intersectionality again, I guess.
Thank you. So I have a next question that seems to me sort of builds directly on what we just said. So sure, perhaps some countries have better, have institutionalized, our ways of dealing with this better. But does that really mean that there's a risk of this becoming a box ticking exercise, right? So by playing the rules in the right way, we're not really dealing with the fundamental problems in the system, but we're just, ticking some box, and it appears that everything is great on the surface, but in reality, these biases are there. And this sort of reminds me this hidden bias point that Rose made. I'm going to start with Liz now.
Okay, thanks. Interestingly enough, that an article this morning in the Times Higher Education was in the Times Higher was specifically about this. They had an article about across global institutions about the presence of policies and procedures to tackle gender inequality, and then they disaggregated it between percentage of institutions who have such policies, and then whether the vague policies and nothing actually happens, or whether there are something that does happen. And you can go and Google it, but the short answer is, yeah, loads of institutions have a bunch of policies or procedures or structures, but they have it so they look good or because they have to. So yeah, I think it is a big problem. I think to some extent though, you've got to start somewhere. You need those before they start to be meaningful. It goes back to what Erin was saying about, sort of organising and advocating. So I think it is a problem, and I think, that's why cultural, softer ways of supporting each other and people are also important. So yeah, no, I mean, I think there are definitely issues with box ticking, but I guess at least the box is there,
Petra?
Yeah, so I wouldn't even call it boxes. I would call it Potemkin villages. But I agree with Liz, like at least the box is there. And when the box is there, I would say approach it like we approach our research. I mean, we know how to disaggregate tables. So I asked the faculty if they would kindly give me a table on what is the proportion of women, and they kind of sneaked in. I mean, it looked all very nice, but I know it is not like that because they just put the administrative positions together with the teaching positions. But I'm a researcher. I study numbers because women do numbers, as we know from Daphne. And so I just asked for another table with better numbers because I wanted to have them. So Potemkin villages are there for us to, and facades are there for us to go behind them. And once they, I think we can we know it from the EU studies, we can rhetorically, we can use these boxes to rhetorically entrap these administrators of science and tell them, well, I'm just doing what, we have these boxes and I'm taking it seriously. And so I think like a bit of a resistance, it's really good to study civil society and civic resistance to these things. What I think is really important and what I think really made a huge effect is that for the EU, these are not just boxes, they mean business. And in the EU projects, you no longer in the Horizon scheme, you cannot get away with what was possible in framework programs that you had PhD students and kind of, exactly this, like putting the tables together and it looked good. No, now they expect you to have leader or co-leader, VP, work package leaders, and they know what they are looking for. And that's really transforming because actually sometimes in some countries, it's easier to break into the European funding before you break into the national funding, because on the national funding, if everybody is a male, like in the Czech Grant Agency political science panel, there are no women because they are mostly professors there. And the 3 female professors don't have all the time for that. So I think that I would give as a tip, like try to network. And now is a really good time. And especially if you come from Southern Europe or Eastern Europe, the EU also demands geographical representation. It can totally play to your benefits. You get your break, do an excellent job, try to really, but you can get a place at the table. It's not about how well you're going to do once you are at the table. I'm sure you will do great. It's just getting that first chance. So I think that is one possibility.
Fabulous. Anna.
I think gender equality studies have also shown that beyond having such rules like have this position in your organization or do this metrics, they speak about having targets, because they said many organizations, not in academia in particular, they were like, so you were supposed to have a gender equality or now like, ethnic and racial equality officers. So they appoint someone, tick this box, let the person, just languish there and do nothing. So they say, and also sometimes if you set too high targets, you won't be meeting them. So you have to take a step at a time and kind of mainstream this. Of course, I think you also see the downside of it. Somebody was, I'm not sure if it was Erin or Rose earlier that were saying, when you get this, oh, you got this position because you're a woman. I think Rose was saying this. And of course, well, here in Canada right now and in the past years, the emphasis has been more on the broader equities. It's called DDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which looks at and we use the term racialized minorities, not ethnic minorities, which would be my term, or migrants or ethnic minorities, let's say racialized minorities. And there is always this concern. On one hand, I'm targeting certain groups. At the same time, then you get this, why am I saying the slack? Oh, yeah, these people got in because they were LGBTQ+ and they were of ethnic minority or racial minority background. So the question is also how to change the culture. And I really was impressed, Liz, by what you said about, how did you call it, the instrumental selfish people and the collective good people? And yeah, that is a question, that how do you reconcile the two if the policy is so you talk, for instance, in what you asked, Daphne, so the policies we want to achieve more gender equality. Also, particularly, I'm more mindful now than I was 3 years ago of LGBTQ+ people or people who don't identify in the binary gender. So how do you achieve that? And same, of course, intersectionality, and we're all in the social sciences, so very much aware of this. And class, I totally agree with you, because also what we have been discussing here also with my team is how, for instance, our understanding of ethnic and racial categories is very much shaped by, particularly when we grew up in another country, by our own country's hierarchy. So if you are, you know, a high skill, like you're an academic here, but you're categorized as a racialized minority, and you don't identify with that because in your own upbringing, like I have difficulty identifying as white because it's not in my repertoire, although I don't deny there is a privilege that going with my appearance, but it just doesn't reflect me. And for instance, I feel closer, Petra, to what you said about, you know, being you know, Czech in Germany and a Czech academic in Germany, and all those discriminations. So I'm just thinking of how I think affirmative action is important. So like, you know, doing quotas, making sure, for instance, and the UI where I was before, we had only maybe in 2015, we started saying, you know, when we recruit for professors, you have to have equal number of men and women in the shortlist, because that's the only way you're going to get women. Because if you say, that's the only way that you're going to, okay, it doesn't have to be a woman that you recruit, but if you recruit 4 or 6 people for shortlist interviews, then it has to be necessarily equal number of men and women, even if we know, okay, at the associate professor level, there's less women than men. So, okay, over sample. But how do we respond? Because we hear also that a lot. Oh yeah, this person got the job because she is Black or brown, or she is this and that. And yeah, and also I'm also mindful, and I mean, so like that there's a lot of white men who are together in this, and they don't want to feel like, you know, we're shooting at them. So that they want to feel included and appreciated.
Thank you. So this brings me, and we have officially run out of time, but if you don't mind, I'm going to quickly ask the last question, because that also comes close to home, and it relates to one. I've had so many experiences myself that I don't obviously have the time, or wasn't my role here to share them. But one that really struck me was a few years ago that I was invited to speak at a conference, mainly with, you know, academics, but also some practitioners. And after I presented my paper on labor market institutions and to what extent they mediate far-right party support, this towering man literally got up and started ranting at me about spreading my communist propaganda. Literally, this happened to me, and it was pretty shocking. He was this, you know, big tall man, and it was a shocking experience. That the chair, which is a senior academic, was a friend of mine, and, you know, he came to me later and he said, I didn't know what to do. Should I have supported you, or should I have left you to support yourself? What is the best way? So the question that we have here, and I think it's a really great way to end, is what can men do, and how should they behave in situations like that? And please, in a very short sentence or two, because we have run out of time, I will start this time with Liz.
Can I just ask what without being too specific, where were you? Was it an academic conference, or was it?
More or less.
Okay. My gut instinct, although I don't know if it's the right instinct, would be for just no platforming of that kind of behaviour, regardless of whether it was a 7-foot huge man or whether it was a 3-foot fairy. You know, there's just no, that's just abuse, and that's not okay. I mean, I understand why your colleague didn't do anything, because they were probably so taken aback by this. But that would be my reaction, that's just not okay in any way, shape or form. And that person should have known better, but they clearly didn't. Yeah, I'd have to reflect on that a bit more. And that's the issue, isn't it? When something like that happens just like that, you don't have time to reflect. But yeah.
Anna.
Yeah, good point, because I think one thought that you would have is that if as a chair I intervene, it's like I'm saying this person cannot defend for themselves. On the other hand, as a chair, you're responsible for the procedural rules. So I think as a chair, yeah, you have to intervene, and particularly in sometimes actually I want to say that in that case probably that person, I mean, it was obvious to the rest of the audience that person was not behaving appropriately. Perhaps the question is when people are undermining, it had happened to me in an EU-funded project several years back. And I'll say the nationality of the person. So we had our researcher from Germany who was a convert, and she was veiled and also very observant. And I'm saying that she was a convert because I want to say that I feel that might also be important. And so we had the Dutch team that were in their Dutch liberal thing, and on one occasion they really denigrated her report. So we were getting together to discuss our case study reports on that particular issue, and I think there was something there. And at some point, so you get to share some comments, but I intervened and I said, hang on, like I had to interrupt the discussion because I had a feeling, I couldn't prove it in a way, but I had a feeling that there was something going on there. So I think we should be aware of these issues, and perhaps it's better to err on the side of caution and be more defensive, more like, hang on guys, just take it easy, than not.
Petra, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with a lot what was said, but as a chair, I would feel the necessity to intervene, not for Daphne's sake, and I would make sure of that, that it is clear, but for the community. Because if that guy gets away with it, then other people get similar ideas in the audience. So I would try to think swiftly on my feet and find some way to show that gentleman who is not a gentleman that there is no place for this way of argument in this community. But I would at the same time try to use also that intervention to buy you more time, because I think you were like a bit in a shock. So I would try, and everybody would. So I would try buy a little bit of time and then transfer the agency to the person who have been addressed if they want to intervene. And that would be really important to find a balance between this is not a community where everything goes, but this is somebody who just made an amazing, and I would probably overpraise you, like that was an amazing report. Perhaps you want to like say whatever to create some kind of an opportunity for you to own your own narrative, and that people go away with like, wow, she's amazing, this guy was I won't use expletives.
I love this for an ending. I love this sentence for an ending. Thank you so much, panel. Honestly, what a stellar lineup. The talk will be available, all the whole recording, so you can watch it again. And if you have any other questions, of course, you can email any of the participants. I want to thank David Landon Cole. He's always helping with these events with the ASEN logo in the background. Thank you, David, for all your support. And here also as a female academic who's, I am where I am, I want to thank ASEN. Actually, it has been one of these fantastic sources of support for me, both back in my naive former self, and now ASEN has been a community offering part of that sort of support, resilience, and everything we've talked about. So it is really important to highlight.
ASEN has gone a long way, right?
Yes,
as well in that field.
Yes, ASEN has gone a long way. So I'm really thankful, and to everyone for this fantastic. Thank you for joining us, and keep tuned for our Ukraine event and our upcoming Anthony Smith lecture and ASEN conference. So have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Bye all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.